Now that the model is done and documentation is also complied, it's time to turn our attention to visual design, for which the most important basic building block would be the perspective views. Up until to this point, we mostly worked in axonometric mode. That's much better for working externally, working on architectural elements. But now we have to create views where we can say where we are standing and what we are looking at. So in order to enter the perspective mode, we have to click on this eye icon up here. And when we do, the whole viewpoint changes. So now we are on the street level, and we have this very nice preview over here, which shows you where you are standing and what you are looking at. So if you zoom in with the mouse wheel, you see that there's this blue node. If you click on it, you can move it around, so you can define where you are standing, and you can also define with this purple node what you are looking at. So this way you can sort of fine-tune what you want to show to your clients about your model. So let's define a few perspectives. First, we are going to do an overview. We are going to face the model, which we can do by moving the blue node somewhere here. And let's say that the purple node will be somewhere there. So now we are looking at the whole model from a street level, and we are facing the model. So we are satisfied with this view, but now we have to save it for further use, which you can do by the green plus icon. And when I click on that, I see that there's a new view created, but I'd rather name this somehow. So I'm just going to double click on it, and let's name it, it's going to be overview front, like so. And let's just hit OK. So now we have this one view selected or created. Let's carry on. Let's carry a few other views. We need one which shows the model from the left hand side. So we are going to zoom in again and move the node, let's say here, because we are going to, this is the building which is in our focal point, so we are going to put that in the foreground, and the rest of the building is in the background. So we are going to again click on the plus icon, and we create another naming for it. This would be, I think this should be street from left, maybe, from left. All right, so we have two new views, and we have to create another one, and that will be the backyard, I think. So we have a couple of pieces of content over there. So if we move the perspective right, so I think this one is almost good. So we are just going to move it like so, and clicking on the plus icon, I can just double click and name it somehow. Let's say I want to name it backyard. Here we go. All right, so question is, how do we navigate between the views? Let's hit OK. So one way to do it is that you click on this eye icon, and then you have the views here. So you can just click on the views, and you can toggle back and forth what you're looking at. That's one way to do it. The other way is using these up and down keys when you are in the 3D. So you can just click on the arrows, and then it just takes you where you need to be. And there's also the page up, page down key. So this works similarly when you are navigating between floors. This time we are going to use the page up and page down keys to navigate between the views. Another thing you need to know, and I haven't talked about this before, is the logic behind how the views are organized. Because if I click back on the eye icon, I see that these views are basically not stored in the order in which they were created, but they are in alphabetical order. So if you want to organize your views, it's always good to add in some numbers or letters. So let's learn a good practice for that. Let's decide what will be the first view that we want to show when we are opening the project. Let's say that this would be street from left. So all you have to do is just add in numbers. So this will be 0, 1, street from left. What should be the second one? I think the overview from front would be the next one. So I'm just going to name this. Again, you could do this when you are creating the views, but later on you can do that too. And then we need the backyard. That would be 0, 3. And the two inside views, the living room 1 and 2, we're also naming them. And this way you can control the order in which the views are going to appear. Here we go. Let's do the last one. This will be 0, 5. And we're good to go. So again, quick refresher if you want to move back and forth between the views. I personally prefer to use the page up and page down keys. Now that the perspectives are done, it's time to look at shadows, how they are going to affect the building. but we don't see any shadows. So how do we turn them on in the first place? If we go to the view toolbar over here and click on shadows, you can ask the shadows to be turned on. When it comes to shadows, there are two kinds of representations. And when I say representations, I mainly think about the 3D editing space. Because if you are going to create a rendering, you would have, of course, much nicer and more elaborate shadows. But when you are just working, you're just modeling, you don't need the elaborate shadows. So in these cases, the software simplifies how the shadows look like, just to represent where the shadows would be. Now, if you want to fine-tune how the shadows look like, you can go to the property grid, and here you have a choice between soft and hard shadows. Now we have a soft shadow. A soft shadow is the least artsy, but fastest way to create a shadow, because to calculate the shadows now, the software doesn't take too much processing power. If you click on hard shadows, the result is a bit better, more accurate, but processing this might take a larger toll on your CPU. So let's go back to soft shadows. That's what we are going to work on now. One problem that we see, one issue that we see over here is that the building is in shadows completely because the sun is shining from the back. This is because of the geolocation and because of the north direction. So that the sun is at this time of the day. But if you want to create, how should I say, a result which might not be accurate, but it looks good, you can temporarily move the sun out of its place. You can move it anywhere you want. Again, that would not give you an accurate result because you are manipulating nature, essentially, but it gives you the right result in terms of looks. So you can do that by going into Sun and clicking on Heliodon. And if you do that, you have two main controls you can use. One is where the sun rises and sets, so you can just click on this node and move it somewhere else. Let's move it like so. So now the sun is going to face the building. So that's one control you can use, and the other one is how high the sun is in the sky. So you can just say that, let's say the sun is like so. So it gives you the right result, but again, it might not be accurate. But if you want to take a few pictures like this, you can do that. You can create some renderings. Mind you, if you create renderings, the result in terms of shadows would be much nicer. Now, but if you want to go with the original sun settings to keep accuracy, and you want to find another time of the day to sort of give a better look to your model, then you can go to shadow and go to shadow simulation, and here you can fine tune the time of the day and the date. Let's move this window out of the way so that way you can see where the sun is moving. And let's say we want to find another time, which would be, I think 11-ish would be fine. And the date should be, I think, April would be fine, like towards the end of April. And we are going to find another perspective. I think the one which is looking at the building from the street, like so, would be fine. Again, if you want to create a better shadow representation, you can go with hard shadows. Again, this gives you a better result. And just to refresh, if you want to again move the sun, you can do that with the sliders, so you can find a better sort of shadow representation to your model. So again, setting up the right sun position is going to ensure that your model would be, or renders would be better looking, but you have the ability using the Heliodon to alter reality and temporarily move the sun in places where it might not necessarily be. We have talked about natural lights. We set up the sun position, we looked at shadows, but one thing is missing from this whole equation is artificial lights. Lamps and light sources. Now, of course, since you are going to create rendered images, ARCHLine does have lamps and light sources as well. But let's clarify the difference between the two concepts. So let's start first with light sources. Now, a light source is basically an entity which is casting light on your model, which you would see the result of in rendering. And these light sources can be assigned to objects, which we are calling lamps. Now, this whole difference between the two is important because just having a lamp without a light source is just an object. But if you have any kind of object and you add a light source to it, then you have a body, an object which is actually giving light to your model, and the result would be very much visible in rendering. Now, there are many different light sources in the software. If you want to add your own, then you are able to import them in a sort of called a IES format. Now, without going too much into the details, IES light source is basically a very faithful representation of the light casting abilities of a light bulb, and you can import that from different manufacturer libraries. We're not doing that now, but you need to know how that works. Now, let's assume that we want to add a lamp over here, just below this kind of roof. How do we do that? We go to the object library of our software, and here we have a folder what we call lighting. Here we go, and here we have different categories based on where these light casting elements, these lamps, are stored. You can categorize them based on where they are coming from. For example, they are coming from the 3D warehouse, or they are mainly ceiling mounted or wall mounted, etc. Let's look at an example. We are looking for a ceiling light, and I think this ceiling light number 3 would be fine. Now, if you open up with a double click the properties of this lamp, there are several things that you need to see in order to understand that these are actually lamps, not just plain bodies. One of the things, the telltale signs that this is a lamp, is this light bulb. If it has this light bulb icon, it means that this is not only an object, but it also has a light source in it. Now, here you have a preview of the object, and just clicking OK, now you are able to place the element onto a surface. Now, in ARCHLine, you are able to snap elements, especially lamps and these kind of elements, onto horizontal and vertical surfaces. That's one way to place an object. The other way would be, let's just hit escape to terminate this command, is just to click on this object and drag and drop onto the surface. So let's say I want to position it here. With another escape, I can close this command, and I can select my lamp to see what it does, what makes it a lamp. Just to compare, if I select any other element, for example, I select this column, I do not see this light bulb, but if I select the lamp itself, I see the light bulb over there. Now, why is that actually important? That's because when you select the lamp, you have options to edit the lamp itself and the light source separately. You can have access to the light source on two different levels. One is to use this drop-down list, and here you can toggle to the light source. Or if you have the lamp selected, you can just click on this light bulb, and then you have the same option. Now here you have the properties of the light source. So these are predefined. These you cannot change, but you can define other things. For example, if the light is turned on and off, and if you want to add any kind of dimming level. So you are going to see later on rendering how this object works in reality. So how it's going to cast light. One thing what you might not need to do, but in my case I'm going to. Whenever I place something in the 3D, I try to be as accurate as possible, but sometimes I'm a little bit off. So in these cases, I leave the 3D behind and I highlight the 2D and try to see if the position of this light is actually okay. Now, not so much. Maybe I want to move it a little bit further to the side so it aligns with the middle of this object. So what I can do, I can just click on the move marker, and I try to find the reference point over here, so then I can just place it in a much nicer position. I think this is a bit better for my purposes. So in a nutshell, this is how you place lamps with light sources, and in rendering you are going to see how they look like when they are in action. It's quite important to note that even without doing any rendering, you can still show your clients how your work looks like. You can create a snapshot of the 3D model that you're currently working on. Before we create a snapshot, we need to decide how we want to show this model. So what is the kind of color scheme in which we want to portray it? Let's find another view. I can use the page up, page down keys to find something which is better fitting my purposes. I think I need the outside, this kind of overview of the street. And if you want to understand how your model can be shown even without being rendered, you need to get here into this settings of the 3D model representation. Now there are several options here. For example, you can go with this hidden line removal, kind of like a paper model feel of the model. Note that this doesn't delete any textures, it just shows the model in a different way. You can also go with a colored or a realistic sort of like outlook. One thing you need to know is that the realistic representation, for example, is a bit of a tricky thing because it tries to replicate the effect that things which have the same color might not look the same on different circumstances. For example, if you have this texture, this kind of grayish texture applied to the underside of a slab, it might look a bit darker than it actually is. So if you want to make sure that your clients understand how the colors actually look like, or how they are actually behaving, then you might need to go with the consistent color option, which is what I use all the time. So in this scenario, no matter how the model is portrayed or moved, the colors are always look the same. So that's one trick of what I always use. Once we have set up the right representation style, again, we are going to use consistent color, and again, we reset the view to the one that we need. We can create a snapshot, which we can do under documentation, snapshot. Let's go to the drop down, and let's say that I want to create a snapshot of the 3D view. Here you can decide what the size of the image could be. The value what you see here is the horizontal size. So these are the current number of pixels which are here horizontally, and vertically it should be what we have here. You can change that, of course, and you can change the file extension as well. So if you want to change another into another file format, you can do that. And here you can either place this snapshot onto the 2D to use it, for example, on your plot layouts, or you can save it and send it to your clients. So if I hit save, then I see that I already did that before. So I have one version of the image here, but let's say I have another version over here. So this could be tutorial 04. And then I can just save this image and send it to my clients via email or via any other means. I just opened up a file browser to see the image that I created. So here's the image that I just took a snapshot of in the resolution I wanted. So now I could send this image to my clients, upload to the cloud, or I can use it in other ways to sort of keep the clients up to date on my work. When our students are asking us what makes a render looking realistic, we always say that there are two things you have to figure out. One is lights, and the other one is materials. Now, lights we have already tackled with the sun and the artificial lights. And now we have to talk about materials. What makes them look realistic? What we are going to do, we are going to work on the backyard, and I'm going to show you in a few examples how to fine-tune your materials. Now, first of all, let's find the view that we need in this case. I think that is going to be the backyard. And here we see that there's a couple of things already taken care of. So I have a nice wooden deck over here. I have some wooden sun chairs and some other elements here. How can I be sure that these are going to behave the way I want them to behave on a render? Now, for this, we have a special tool in the software. We call it render styles. Now, if I click on the render styles, then I see that there are a couple of previews, these thumbnails, and this might make you think that these are materials or textures that we have here, but they are not. They're actually functions. So you can assign these functions onto surfaces, and then these functions would dictate how these surfaces would behave. Let's illustrate. For example, I have this nice wooden deck over here, and I have a corresponding wood material, or not material, render style in this palette. So I can just grab onto it and apply it onto the surface. If I click on it, I see that, well, actually, I'm clicking, but nothing is happening. But this is because this would not change the material. Instead, it would change the way it's going to look like in rendering. Let's continue, and later on you will see what I mean. Let's zoom in, and let's click now on the windows as well. You don't have to click on all the windows because this would change the behavior of the material in all the instances. Let's continue. I'm going to terminate this with a nice escape and click on wall, and I'm going to apply it onto the wall surfaces, make sure that all the surfaces behave the same way. Going back to wood, I think I haven't done these chairs yet. Again, there's this nice leather over here for which I'm going to give maybe a metallic but rather a chrome surface. Here we go. So you see, whenever you click, nothing is really happening, nothing seemingly is happening, but you'll see later on. For example, if you talk about water, you think that these would look nice on the rendering, but you can add additional properties to it using the water function. And when you place it, you see that now actually something is happening. The texture is not changed, but it's becoming a bit transparent, which would look very nice on rendering. Another thing you need to know, if you are assigning these render styles and you move the mouse cursor onto surfaces, then you see a preview, this kind of tooltip to show you what are the current sort of functions of these surfaces. So it tells you all the properties you need to know. So when you are in the mode of adding render styles, you already see what is the sort of function of these elements, which is already assigned. Now, how do you keep track of all the surfaces? How do you know which have been applied a render style with, or which are the ones that you haven't worked on? For this, we have this color coding. So every single render style has this kind of colored thumbnail, or this kind of index. For example, this glossy covering has this pinkish rectangle, etc., etc. And if you are going to click on this color-coded view, then it tells you, it switches the view into this kind of preview to show you which are the surfaces that have render styles and what kind of styles they have. So for example, this way you can understand that the walls have applied to these surfaces and glass have applied to these particular surfaces. So this is a good way to track if maybe you have forgotten about something. For example, maybe I want to change the rain gutter to something metallic. So I'm just going to click on this and apply the different render styles. So this way you can make sure that you're not missing on anything. In fact, it's better to have this this color-coded view turned on when you are editing the materials. Otherwise, you might get into a situation when you are missing something. Maybe this column should have a wall style as well. So I'm just going to add it like so. So in a nutshell, you can go back to the original view like so. Sorry, restore. Seemingly nothing is happening, but you are changing the function of the materials, which would give you a very nice end result in rendering. You might have already noticed that there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the model that I'm creating and the models that my fellow designers have created. Let's go outside and see what I mean. You can see here that there's a very special like brick material applied to this elevation of the building, but I don't have this on my end. So I need to change these parts, and also on the side I need to change the material to something else. So let's zoom in and see how it's done. There are more than one ways to change materials for an element. I'm going to show you one, but I'm going to show you other ways as well as we go on. So select the wall that you want to change, and you need to disable the setting which will dictate that the inside and the outside of the wall should have the same material. So let's disable that and go with the exterior settings, and we are going to use this brick 6 because that's the one that others have used on the rest of the building. So I'm just going to hit OK, and it is changed. Similar way, I'm just going to switch to the other wall. Again, disable the same material setting, and the exterior is going to be changed to brick number 6. Now, this might be a bit cumbersome if you have more than one walls, as is the case now. So we are just going to go out here, and I'm going to show you how to do it in one step for more than one wall. So I'm going to click on one of the walls I want to change, and I'm going to hit Control, and while navigate, hit Control again, and now I have more than one wall selected. So again, I'm just going to go same materials disabled, finish face exterior is going to be brick. So there you go. And we go to this to the ground floor again, select the walls, release the Control button, move to the other side of the building, and again Control again, and here disable this and go with brick 6. So this way, let's just find a view which would show us better what we need. I think the outside is now should be okay. One thing is missing is this column, so I'm going to repair them as well. For this, I'm going to show you a trick, a shortcut if you like. For example, if you want to copy paste this material onto the columns, then you can just highlight the surface and you just say find material, and then you can just drag and drop this material onto the surface, and you can just say that replace with this material with another on this object once and twice, and this way you can just easily change anything that you want in terms of materials. I'm not sure about the render style, so let's just do some refreshing and see if these materials have the right render style. So I'm just going to go back to the main selector, go render styles. Let's do color coded, and I see that this is not the one I need. So this has this kind of material, but at least it's consistent. So later on we can change that. I just wanted to make sure that it looks the same. I think this is good. So let's proceed. We did talk about materials already, but the question is, how do you get your own custom new materials into the software? Now, of course, you can use our own library here, but if you want to create your own things, then you can just click on the cogwheel over here and click on Create New Material. Where you are introduced to this dialog where you can name your material and you can use an existing image, to create something new. Now, when I say image, it means that these images could come from any sources. You can get it from an online library. You can get it from your own collection of JPEGs or PNGs. Let's see the scenario when you find something nice online and you want to use it in the software. You want to use it on this building. Let's open up the browser. There are tons of websites with downloadable content. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but one thing what we recommend is this polyhaven.com, which has a couple of very nice high resolution materials free to download. And the one we are using is this beige wall 001. Let's select it, and if you click on this button over here, you have several options of which version you want to download this material off. We are going to go with diffuse JPEG. Now, if I click on that, I have the image loaded up in a separate tab in my browser, and if I hit right click, I can just save the image to my local folders, and then I can read that into ARCHLine. Let's see how that works. I'm not saving that now because I already did that, but if I go back to ARCHLine, here we go, and I click on browse, then I can see the content that I already downloaded, click on it, hit open, and then the new material would load up here and also in the preview. And another thing, the name would be defaultly filled up with the new material's name. Now, next thing I could do, I could categorize the materials. So I can say that this is something belonging to buildings, and the subcategory would be, I think it should be maybe plaster would be fine. Producer, I don't really know, so I'm going to use it as it is. Let's look at the tabs that we have here. Let's start first with physical properties. The physical properties would tell you how big this material is. What is the repetition size? So, for example, if this is 500 times 500 millimeters, then that's the size of the sample, which would be repeated based on this setting. So, if you have a 500 times 500 size for this, then that's the size of the material. This is not that visible now because this looks like a solid color, but if you have some kind of pattern in it, then that will be the repetition of that pattern. Let's go on with appearance. Here we have a very familiar thing, the render style. If we click the drop down, then I can set this to all, and then I can make sure that all the properties would be added to this material. And here's where the render style becomes interesting, because there are all kinds of sliders here. You can control the transparency, brightness, reflection of this material. Of course, you can do that by hand, but if you work based on render styles, these settings will be done on your behalf. You don't have to care about that, and you see in this nice preview how this material would look like. Thermal parameters, we are not changing that. Hatch in 3D and hatch in section are the selectors which would govern how this material would look like on any kind of section drawings, detail drawings. So if you want to set up a nice hatch pattern for this material, then you can do that over here. This is just a slight detour. We did that before, but at least you know where to find it. So okay, let's hit OK. And now, if I don't have to find the material because it's already selected in my material library, and I can use that material to change some existing elements on my model. What I'm going to change is this part of the model, this facade over here and there. This brick 6 I ended up not liking eventually, so I'm going to change it to something new. So what I do, I just click on the material, drag it and drop it, and say that I want to replace this material with another on all instances. If I click on it, I see that yes, it's going to be replaced, but actually not on all instances. Why is that? This is because this part of the model was actually linked from another model. So this is not something that I can edit. This is not something that I can change. because this part of the work still belongs to my fellow designer. So if he changes the original model, then I can update his changes over here. Now, having looked around, I see that there's one thing I forgot to do, and that's changing this column. So I'm just going to drag and drop this material over here, and I'm just going to do that. So this way you can easily find new content, new materials on online libraries or from any other sources. You can add them to the software, and you can change existing elements to these materials. Make sure you set up the right render style, by the way. This method of working that I just showed you, that finding a material, replacing everything with it, is effective but a bit destructive. So there's no easy way to jump back to earlier versions. You have to redo everything. And in order to avoid that, I'm going to teach you how to use color cards. Now, what color cards do is that they take a color scheme and replace it with something else. So you have, for example, one material, and you can replace all instances with it, all instances of it with another color, another texture, and then you can have another version and another version. This is a very effective way of having a talk with your clients and try different versions of a color scheme. How does that work? So I think it's best illustrated in action. So what we do is that we have the material that we already have here selected, and let's assume that this would be only one version of the facade that I want to try, but I want to have two other versions as well. So I'm going to click on this cogwheel, and I say create a copy as a color card. Now I'm going to hit yes, and here I have the ability to, first of all, let's name it. Let's name it wall coloring. And I need to add another material to this list, which would be an alternative to this beige wall coloring. So clicking on this green plus, I can browse for another element, maybe something from the model. Let's say bricks number 6, because what if I want to try the original version? So let's add that, and let's add another one, which would be, I think we are looking for something like a stone wall-ish color, like so. And let's hit, before I hit OK, actually, I have the option here to select one of the materials, which would be the default one to this color card. Let's choose brick 6, and let's hit OK. When I do, something changes here in this, in the project content holder here. I have a wall coloring color card with the default brick number 6 set up. How does this work? How do I use this on this wall segment? Well, you just have to click on it, drag it, and drop it onto the surface. And you have to choose select one material with another on all instances. And here you can select, okay, which material you want to replace it with. Let's go with brick number 6. And here you go. Now you have replaced all instances with the original brick number 6 version without losing the original color. You can revert back to that. I'll show you how. So you right click on the wall, and you say that you want to find the color card over here. And here now, if I click on the versions, let's just move this out of the way. Click on the members of the items of this color card. I can try different versions of this facade. So maybe you want to go back to the original brick number 6. Maybe you want to go with the beige, or maybe with this stone version. The point is that if you are creating rendering, the rendering will always show the current setting of the color card. So if you go back to the original brick 6, then this is what you are going to create the rendering based on this. So the rendering would always reflect what you have set up here. So just to sum up, color card is a very effective way of trying different versions of the same items, different color schemes, very good way to communicate with your clients. So let's get cracking, let's create our first renderings. For those of you who are more technical minded than I am, we are going to use a component which is a CPU renderer. So it's going to mainly use your computer's processor, and the thing is that this is a bit demanding on your computer. So if you are doing renderings, then make sure you're not doing anything as demanding, because otherwise the rendering process will be longer than expected. By the way, if you want to check on this, again, for the technical minded, we are using a rendering engine which is manufactured by the French company Redway. Now, rendering is all handled here under View, and in this dialog, or in this drop-down list, we have several choices here. Mainly we have standalone and integrated, and two for each. One is a final render, the other one is a draft. Draft is what you would be using if you are still not finished with your work and you don't want to waste too much time on rendering yet because you are not really sure if you are done modeling at all. Standalone would give you a window that you would be able to move to another screen or use even if you close ARCHLine. So if you want to use, if you want to create a rendering which would be running in the background while you are doing other things, standalone rendering would be the way to go. You can either go for a final render or with a real-time draft. And the same thing is repeated here with an integrated mode. The integrated would mean that you have a window running within ARCHLine. So this would show you all the things that you do. So every time you do something, then the changes would be updated in the rendering. But what is exactly that we are rendering? Let's go back to the model. You can render anything you see in the 3D, so any arbitrary view, let's say for example this, but I personally always like to use a predefined view because then you can be sure that you can track back to this very same view and you could have, for example, multiple versions of the same view and then you can compare them. The next question that I could be asking is what is the size of what we are going to render, or better yet, what is the size that I actually see of this image? Because you know you can magnify this window any way you want. How am I to know what is the size or what is the boundary of my vision? Now, if you go back to rendering, you can turn on and off this render frame. Let's click on it. Now, seemingly nothing is happening, but that's only because the view is currently smaller than what the render render frame allows me to see. Let's put this into a larger view, and I still don't see the edge of it. So let's just unpin the project navigator. And now I see these things over on the side here and over here. This shows that the content that is on the left hand side of this dashed line and same here to the right hand side is not going to be part of what I'm rendering. So that is okay. This is just for you to know that this is where the edge of your image would be. Now let's open up the rendering window and see what kind of settings we have over there. Let's go to rendering, and this time we are going to do a standalone rendering in a real-time draft. Real-time draft is a good way to make sure that every time you do some change on your model, the change will be updated. A couple of settings over here, let's go through them. Now, the advantage of a real-time draft is that the fact that it's draft, it's going to be very quick, but not too high in terms of quality. So it might be a bit grainy, but it gets the job done. It tells you the things that you want to see at this point. For this reason, I don't recommend to crank up the resolution. Let's keep it as it is. I think this would be good enough for our purposes. And again, the render preset would be a real-time draft. We are not changing that one. Visualizing the light sources would mean that every time you have a light source on your model, it would add a tiny light bulb onto the image, which might be okay if you want to create like a lighting plan, but at this time, we are not going to ask for the light sources to be visualized. We need to enable artificial lights, which in this case we mean the lamps, so we need to enable them. And we have a couple of presets in terms of sunlight. We are going to use a clear daylight. I think that's good enough. Sun intensity, we could crank it up, but I think at this point we are okay with that. Bump mapping would govern the roughness, the lifelikeness of the materials. We are going to see later on how that's relevant. And you can have a customized background image. Now, what you can do is that you can either go with an image, which you can browse from your computer, or you can download from a website. But I like to use a panorama, because if you do use a panorama, then wherever you turn in your 3D, you would always see a very nice, all-covering background. Now, we have a couple of panoramas in a preset in the software, with some hills in the distance, sunny plain, etc. And you can always download one from other websites. So if you have one in the right format, then you can load that up. There are some other settings over here, but at this point I always like to just get things going, start rendering, and later on you can figure out the details, and that's what we are doing now. Let's hit start rendering. Now, what is happening here is that the software is bounding up the 3D model and passes it onto the rendering engine. And then after a little bit of processing, the result would appear in front of our eyes. And the important thing is that the result here would not be that spectacular at this point. But that's fine. We don't need final results. We need a draft. We need to see if the shadows are okay, if the materials are looking nice. So we see one preliminary example over here. So this is how my model should look like if I do a final rendering. And this will be a very solid foundation of my further work. the render draft is, by definition is a draft, so it might not be, it could be far from being perfect. If I zoom in, I see that reflections might not be okay, it could be better, it could be of a higher resolution, but it gets you a very clear understanding of how your model behaves at the moment based on the current material settings and visual settings. So of course you can fine tune the details here, and you can do all kinds of editing, but you don't need to, because at this point this is just only to show you how with your current settings the model would look like. You can go to details, of course, and you can crank up from a real-time draft to a full all-out rendering, but we don't need to do that because we need to still edit a few things. Then you might be asking, okay, if I have to do this again, why do I need to know the draft at all? Now, one huge advantage and strong point of the draft is that if you do any kind of change in your model, then those changes will be reflected here. Not only that, but if you move the camera, those changes are tracked here too. So if I go back to ARCHLine and I move a bit closer to the entrance, and I look upwards, like so, for example, and if I go back to the rendering window, I see that the changes, this kind of changes in terms of viewpoint are automatically tracked. So every time you move around, let's just show you that. So if I go to another view, I just jump back into the, again, if you have another screen, you can just move this window to the other screen, and then you can just leave it there. So every time you do some kind of change, then the draft would reflect those changes. Okay, so at this point, we are just going to stop this rendering, and we are going to discard this, so we don't need to save this image. The software asks us if we want to do in case we want to keep a copy of this, but we are not going to keep that. And we are going to move on to a final rendering. For the final render, I think I'm again going to use another view, maybe the one on the street. And well, the process is a bit similar with some minor differences. If you go to rendering and you go to standalone rendering, we almost see the same menu with some things of worth noting. Resolution we are not changing, but here we have render presets, and here we have a couple of numbers and letters to sort of code you which presets could be used in which scenarios. We are going to use A01 to A03, and these are the presets that you could be using on exterior models, and which one you should be using is the questions that you would be asking. But first, we are always starting with a quick render. That will get the job done, but depending on how many light sources, how many surfaces, how many materials you have, this might not get you the right results. Maybe there will be some graininess, and if that happens, you can go a bit higher. So these are actually in terms of how high the quality of the end result would be. So we start with the lowest one, and we are keep on going until we hit the right mark. You should be asking, okay, why don't we start with the highest resolution or highest quality? Well, you could, but maybe you don't need that at the moment. Maybe you don't want to spend too much time on this. Maybe you want to see which stages which gets the job done for you the best. So let's start with the A01, and I'm not going to change any other presets. I'm going to start rendering. And again, the same thing happens as before. The software is going to bundle up the whole model, the whole 3D model, and passes it onto rendering. And now the process takes a bit longer, but the result will be much better than the draft. So once the rendering actually starts processing the 3D model, we see the same thing as we saw before, only even at this time we see that it's much less grainy. The reflections are better, but there would be some difficult parts which we need to take care of, and that we can do with a higher setting. So what we can do is that we can wait for the rendering to run to the end, and then we can save the image, and then we can send it to clients, or maybe copy to a hard drive or paste it back onto a plot layout. You see that the rendering in a final quality setting takes a lot more than creating a draft render. But even before you are finished with rendering the final result, you see that there's a couple of things what you can do. Let's just first zoom in and see how the quality is being cleared up as we speak. So we see that things are getting sharper edges, so the result is coming along nicely. And if you go to the effects, there's a couple of sliders based on which you can fine-tune the end result even before the end result is created. So let's see how these sliders work. now that the rendering ran all the way till the end, I can save the image to my hard drive, or I could use the sliders to boost the end result. Let's get familiar with what the sliders can do, because they can do wonders with the result here. First, let's start with exposure. We could go top to bottom from brightness, but exposure is the thing that you would take care of first. If you go high, then the scene might get a bit burnt out, and if you go to the lower levels, then everything gets a bit darker, because this works a bit like when you have a professional camera and manually set up the exposure to have more to have the film exposed to more sunlight. So actually exposure and brightness could go hand in hand, because the two handled together would give you the right result. Brightness is working in this concept. It's going to make every single one of the pixels look brighter. So if you crank it up, then things get a bit faded, and if you go down, then things get darker. So what we always recommend is to sort of try to use the brightness and the exposure, going hand in hand. Try to find the golden middle. I think the exposure would be fine. Maybe if the brightness would be cranked up a little bit. I think this is getting better. We could go back to these settings later on if we want to. The setting over here is contrast. This makes now that I look at it, I think I need to crank up the brightness a bit more. It looks good on the big screen, and the smaller screen it looks a bit too dark, but we can go back to that later on. Okay, so talking about contrast, again, you could go crazy with this setting, so you can say that everything is a bit, faded and grainy, or you can go all the way up. The point is that if you ever get lost, if you don't know how to reset the setting back to the original one, you can just click on the button over here, and that would crank the value that you are setting back to the original setup. Now, talking of saturation, this would handle the colors. So if you want to wash out the whole thing and you want to create like a black and white version of your model, you can do that. But if you go into the other direction, the result would be a bit of a cartoonish, sort of like this crazy inverted like colors. So let's just click on it to go back to the original one. About shadows, this would boost the shadows that you have here, but if you crank it too much, then the dark areas would be a bit too dark, so it would look like this model is suffering for hangover. So let's just click back on it. Here we have two settings which would go hand in hand. We have the midtones and the highlights. Again, this would if you modify them too much, then the result would be a bit faded or too extra, if I can say that. But you can use them if you want to give a very special outlook. White balance would shift the whole model or the whole picture into a bluish or a more like reddish area. So you can use them to find sort of like a sweet spot for this model to make sure that it looks okay. And we got back to exposure. Now I think my model is still a bit faded, so let's just give it a bit more brightness. So again, there's no sort of golden rule for that. You have to find the right settings which work the best for you. Otherwise, what you could do is that even if you are not sure about what the end result should look like, if you are unsure if this is the right style for you, you can of course save the model, save the image, and then you can give it another go and have another try at rendering and give it a different end result. So if I click on save now, I can see that there's a couple of versions I did before. So you can save this as street from left, and you can save it as try one. And from this on, you can have this image and you can email it to your clients. Again, rendering takes some time to get an eye for that. So if you understand what the sliders can do, you can create the best possible end result in the least amount of time. Once you are done with the rendering and with the effects, let's discuss a couple of other things that this window can do. You don't see that because my face is covering it, but there's an option to change the resolution for the rendering. But beware, if you are in standalone rendering, in a final render, if you change this, the rendering will restart. So every time you change something in the details, you add another background and you crank up the quality to a higher level, rendering would be start from the beginning. Now we already moved to this detail step, so let's discuss the content here for a second. You might be familiar with these items because this is the same thing you would see when you start rendering. So again, you can change the the light source visualization, enable artificial lights. You can change the background, but again, if you change anything here, then you might need to start rendering over again. Another thing you can see here is the selector for your views. All the views are here that you have recorded, so the things that we had set up before are here available. You can just switch to them and then you can make a render on them. Before we go to the third tab, let's go to this DOF. This stands for depth of field. Now, this might be relevant if you would have some elements of interest in the foreground, because this tool enables to find something which is in your focal point. So if you have, for example, you have an interior model and you have like a vase in the foreground and everything in the background could be blurred out and vice versa. So this becomes interesting if you have a scene with more depth. You can just enable that and certain elements would be sharper than the rest. Now let's talk about the third tab, the render list. If we click on that, we see that we have familiar things here. These are the perspectives that we recorded. Now, why are they in this list? What does this tool do? Now you can see that this render, what we saw here, not counting the afterwork, took almost 7 minutes to complete. So if you have 4 or 5 scenes and you multiply that with 7 minutes, it's a long time. So you don't want to spend that much time in front of your computer, bad for your eyes. So you need to find some kind of automated way to render these images without you having to be there. And that's what the render list actually does. The best practice for this is that you start rendering the image, quickly find a setting, stop rendering it, and then you do this with all the scenes over here, and then you would have the presets, and then you can just check all of them and click start, and then all the images would be rendered one after the other. This saves a tremendous amount of time. You don't have to spend too much time setting up the things. You don't have to wait for the renders to be done because they would be done on a separate window. Now, basically, that's what rendering is all about in ARCHLine. So we have come a long way from the first lines in the DWG drawing and getting all the way here. There's a couple of other things we are going to show later on, but the modeling, the documentation and visual design part is done. If you have any questions regarding what we have showed you, you can always ask the questions down in the comment section of this video. We hope you enjoyed this part, and we are going to continue with some other things in later videos.